Hello and welcome to Hex Bash Plays, and today we're going to be taking a look at a budget build system that I did recently, and I also sold it. This is going to be an Intel 1220 V2 Xeon processor, and it is going to be paired with an MSI H61 motherboard. I'll get all the specs listed for you throughout the video here, and one thing to note, I did not get any good video footage of the motherboard and the build process, so hopefully you guys will just settle for pictures and that'll be fine. But one other thing to note here is that I did pair it with the EVGA 680 that I did in my last video, and I thought it was overall a great pairing and a great budget system. So anyway, let's get into the video and see what you can expect out of this setup. Alright, so taking a look at the build, this is what we came up with. Now, this is just a still image, but this is more or less what the board was. So it is an MSI H61M P23. Now, this motherboard did need a BIOS update in order for it to work with the Xeon 1220 V2, as I discovered later. However, thankfully, the person that I bought this from on eBay included an i3 2100, so I was able to upgrade the BIOS and then put this new chip in, and everything worked just fine. I am using 8 gigabytes of memory, like I mentioned before. I'm not exactly sure of the brand name. It came out of an HP computer that I used to have, but didn't need anymore, and it ultimately went to scrap because that machine died. But anyway, so the MSI video card that you're seeing in this photo is not the EVGA 680 that I mentioned before. Obviously not. But it was put into the build first because I wanted to test it out. However, I noticed that there were some bottlenecks with the GPU. It was working fine, but I wasn't getting the most performance out of it, so I put it into another build. And as you can see, we have the very large Zalman cooler there. I like this Zalman cooler a lot, just based on its design and the way that it looks. It was supposed to have a blue LED, but it didn't work, so that doesn't really matter. I actually got that from a friend, so I wanted to say thank you to him in the video as well. This was actually going to be on a 755 build on a Q6600, but I no longer have that computer either. So the Zalman cooler fit right into what I needed for this build. So that is what this looked like overall. I've also included a picture of what the machine looked like when it was finally finished. But on to some video games. Alright, so the very first game that we recorded here was CSGO. And CSGO, obviously one of the most popular esports in the world right now. And it's also free to play, so that makes it even better. But yeah, so from my experience here, we were getting about 100 frames per second on average, but we were dipping down, and I do believe those dips were due to the processor. So I would say anywhere from 60 to 100 frames per second would be what you would expect out of this game on most maps at 1080p. You can obviously drop it down to 720, but I didn't for the purposes of this video, and I was very happy with the result. I mean, I would probably use this rig if I decided to, downsize or something like that. I would use this rig as a daily driver. But like I mentioned before, I did sell this system to another buyer, but yeah, anyway, so that's basically where I'm at right now. I love this game. I love the whole computer, and I was also trying to do some tech support with somebody, which I did help that person out as well. But yes, this was overall just a lot of fun, and like I said, CSGO, very playable. And in this section here, it's about 100 frames per second for this individual that I'm watching. And okay, so yeah, yeah, I was kind of quick switching between all the different players to see if I could hit that frames per second any lower. And like I said, very playable result. I recorded a full match, but I'm going to go ahead and end it here. But yes, I'm definitely playable. So on to the next game. Okay, so here we have GTA 5, and we're running the benchmark, and I accidentally cut off a part of the clip there, so I do apologize for that. But as you can see, we're getting about 70 frames per second inside of this benchmark, and overall, I think it's a really good result, just like I will say over and over again in this video, uh, just because I was not expecting these results, especially with such old hardware. But then again, GTA 5 is also a very old game, and it's also very well optimized. So as you can see in the lighting test, we get about 70 frames per second when it finally loads up here. It does take a little while to load, so even with the SSD, which is a 240 gigabyte Evo, a Samsung Evo, I believe, and it honestly does really good. So yeah, I was just blown away by all the results. And one thing I would note here is that if you were to build the system, you're going to spend about $200 to $300. I had a lot of leftover parts from other builds or just from my main rig that I finally upgraded. Like, I finally got a mechanical keyboard, so I was able to upgrade that Corsair keyboard that you saw in the image that I put up of the finished computer. So yeah, I mean, it's just overall wonderful. And yeah, so here we have the flyover scene, and we're getting about 60 frames per second, which is perfect because that was a 60 hertz monitor that we were using. And here we can get upwards of 80 frames per second, but FPS isn't the only thing. You want your game to be able to run buttery smooth, and overall I think we achieved that result. And I would love to have got a little more memory for it. I would have loved to have done 16 gigs instead of 8, but I made a mistake when I purchased my RAM. I thought it was a 16 gig kit, as in 2 by 8 gigs, but it turned out to be 16 gigs of ECC memory, and even though it was cheap, it definitely was not what I was expecting. But here we have the scene where you drive down the street and end up ultimately crashing into the truck. And this is probably where you get the most realistic gameplay from the game itself, because this is what it would look like in world. So 50 frames per second is definitely playable. It's well over 30, and you won't really notice a difference too much unless you can, unless you're just somebody who's sensitive to that kind of thing. But overall, like I said, a wonderful result, and very playable. So on to the next game, which I believe is going to be Rocket League. And Rocket League, you'll notice, yeah, I'm a terrible Rocket League player, but we'll get on to that. So on to the next game. All right, so here we have Rocket League, and Rocket League is DirectX 9 compatible, so most systems will be able to run this game without any issues whatsoever, because DirectX 9 is actually a very old API from Windows. I believe DirectX 9 ran on Windows XP. Yes, that is correct. So it ran on Windows XP, and so because of it being so old, and I'm actually amazed at how well Rocket League looks. I mean, how wonderful it looks, even at the highest details and settings. So at 1080p gaming, I mean, this is one of the greatest esports there is, in my opinion. I love this game so much. But anyway, I'll stop gushing about the game and the API. But as you can see in the upper right corner, we have about 150 frames per second while playing. And this is going to be typical for any hardware that's able to keep up. I was able to get this result with an RX 560 and a few other titles as well. I did turn some of the detail settings down for the more competitive frames per second, which you will want to do, even in a modern computer with up-to-date hardware. So just to get that slight edge. But again, this computer was on a 60 hertz monitor, so FreeSync was not a thing, or even something to consider. So anyway, yeah, so you can see me playing pretty badly, and I'm playing with randoms, and we also have a bot on our team, so that did not help things at all. But again, 150 frames per second according to the in-game counter, and that should be pretty typical. Even on newer hardware, you should be able to get better results as well. But overall, very playable experience. I would, again, impressed with the results here as such. But that processor, I believe, does slow things down as far as loading times go. So that is something to be aware of if you do decide to go with the Xeon processor. If I had even thought about it, I would have grabbed results from the hardware monitor or something like that to see what our temps and thermals were and if we were boosting. But I believe we were at a 3.5 gigahertz boost the whole time, just because that cooler did help quite a bit. And one thing I didn't mention was I did discover that Corsair makes a thermal paste, and they had it available at my local Best Buy, and I actually used that for the processor, and because I just wanted to test it out. But paired with that Zalman cooler, I believe our temps were just fine. The one thing about the EVGA 680 was that it did get kind of loud, and the only reason why is because of that blower style cooler that it has, which I am not the biggest fan of, but haha, pun. But anyway, I wasn't the biggest fan of the blower style cooler, but it definitely didn't overheat or anything like that. And another thing I forgot to mention is I did also replace is the better word here, replaced the thermal paste on the processor as well, or I should say the GPU, just to make sure that our temps weren't going to be an issue, and they weren't. The only issue that I honestly would say that was kind of a downside for me, at least, was the case. And the SRM01 for a $20 case, because I was able to get it on sale last Christmas for Black Friday, Newegg had a good deal on it, so that's why I bought it. The case does leave a lot of you will be wishing for a lot of things. The number one thing is the amount of space for GPUs, and also working inside of the case once you have everything in it and running. If you didn't notice from the video clip that I played showing off the cooler, was the cable management. I am not the best cable manager in the world, and in fact, Anthony on Linus Tech Tips used this case in a recent build of his that they did for the channel, and I would say definitely go watch that video to see how well you can actually cable manage it. But yeah, I honestly thought overall, though, again, great result, great computer. If you're on a budget, and like I said, you shouldn't be spending more than $300 on the build at all. And like I said, I'll list the prices of everything that I paid for at the end of the video here, or somewhere in here. I might even just throw it up at the beginning, I'm not sure. But anyway, I'll stop yammering on here, and we'll go on to the next game, which I am going to say is my favorite benchmark that I did, and I was the most blown away by, especially because of how modern it is. So let's get on to that game. Alright, so here we have Forza Horizon 7. I was so shocked about this game, and I believe you will be too. Now, I had to record this from my iPhone because for some reason OBS software was not working properly. I couldn't begin to tell you what was going on there, but I was so blown away by this result. I mean, if you notice the frame counter up in the right hand corner, it's about 33 frames per second, which is just phenomenal in my opinion. The fact that you can play this game at 1080p 30 frames per second with such old hardware shows how optimized this game really is. And also, I mean, it just looks gorgeous, and I'm hoping that my iPhone is capturing that. And in certain parts, you can get up as high as 45 to 50 frames per second. And you'll see the end result here. I did make sure to capture that screen, so that way you could see exactly what settings I was using. But yeah, I mean, This was such a fun project, such a great build, and I intend on doing it again in the future. I don't know if I'll be using the exact same parts, but I will be going back to that Xeon V2, the 1220 V2, just so I can build more budget gaming rigs. I was just, like I said, blown away by all the results here. So with that, I'm going to end the video. I want to say thank you guys very much for watching. Please leave a like, please comment, please subscribe if you feel inclined to do so. And anything that you can suggest that I do better in the future or think that I could do differently, definitely let me know. And thank you again for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.